Do you ever hold some kind of briefing session with the interpreter before going to the mediation?
We haven't yet. Realistically, the most important issues are obviously everything is confidential. And the interpreters we use are all engaged by professional translation and interpretation companies. So they are used to providing interpreters for court. So no, we haven't had a pre-briefing session. There was a mediation I conducted about 8-10 years ago where we had two profoundly deaf clients, and we used ESL interpreters, English Sign Language interpreters, and because both of them were effectively unable to speak except through an interpreter, we needed two interpreters so they didn't have to timeshare the interpreter.
Okay.
And there was quite a discussion we had on the phone, I had on the phone, with those interpreters before we set up the mediation in that particular case.
Right. Would it be useful to have some kind of best practices or guidelines for interpreters working in mediation?
I think it could. My concern would be that, as we were seeing in this particular role play, where you have a situation where there is no element of common language between the parties, which you would not expect if it was a married couple or a cohabiting couple, then it's a very different feel than there is where there is no common language between the two parties. Because with no common language between the two parties, you have the problem that I was discussing with you before, which is that if you have question from mediator put jointly to both parties, immediately taken up by the interpreter in the language of party B, party B then responds, interpreter then translates party B's response. Party A is always on the back foot and therefore never gets the chance, unless they're pretty assertive, to jump in and give their response before all the interpretation happens, or perhaps after the question is interpreted but before the answer comes back from party B. So I think that identifying that as a risk where there's no element of common language between the parties is a really important thing that you could do in best practice terms or good practice terms, and say watch for this and be prepared as mediator to continue your choreography of sorting out who does what when all the way through the mediation. I think also the point that was made about look at the person you're addressing the question to, not the interpreter, is a very powerful learning point for me, as was explicit permission being given to the interpreter to say, enough, I now need to translate what I've got, rather than waiting for a natural pause from the mediator or from the party. And that, I think, in terms of a briefing to take place once everyone's in the room together, would be a really useful thing to do. So rather than have a briefing just with the interpreter, have a briefing with everyone to say, we found in our experience that it is helpful not to overload the interpreter. So therefore, if at any stage anybody is saying something, the interpreter needs to stop the input so that they have not too much to translate, then they will cue us if that's what's needed.
Right. We have seen a consecutive interpreting all the time. Has there been any situation, or would you prefer other kinds of interpreting, like the whispered interpreting to one of the parties? Would it make it maybe quicker or easier, or how did you feel with this turn taking and this
Okay. Yeah, I'm still wondering whether I should shut the window.
I think we should, yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow we got traffic. Y es como nos acercamos más sin que se vea, ¿no?
Se ve en
No
plano.
importa. Because for some reasons, we need to find out why mediators are so reluctant to work with interpreters. There must be reasons.
I have no reluctance to work with interpreters.
No.
You don't.
Yeah,
No,
how,
you don't.
how
you
can
don't,
you
but-
not work with interpreters? I think some mediators perhaps might be in areas of the country where interpretation isn't required. I suppose that could be a logical explanation. But
In an ideal world, you might have bilingual interpreters. But if you haven't got bilingual interpreters,
Bilingual mediators.
Mediators.
sorry.
Mediators.
Yeah, exactly. If you haven't got bilingual mediators,
Right.
then how else would you deal with the situation where you have parties who don't have a common language?
and if it's an issue for the mediator, then they have to question themselves: Am I the right person to be conducting this mediation? You know, if the parties need interpreters, they're going to have interpreters. Mediation can't proceed otherwise.
But ideally, I guess if you had a couple whose common language is Polish, you would try to field a Polish-speaking mediator. But if you haven't got a Polish-speaking mediator to work with Polish-speaking clients, and that's not so obvious if you're dealing with English and Welsh law, then you have to use interpretation.
Could you mediate in Welsh, Robin?
I couldn't, no, my Welsh isn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be dangerous.
Yeah.
My Welsh is colloquial Welsh, it's not professional Welsh.
Mm-hmm. Would you rather use an interpreter trained in mediation or a bilingual mediator?
I would prefer, I would, if it was my choice as the person providing the service, if I could field a bilingual mediator, I would. But the difficulty is that a bilingual mediator, if you had a situation where there's no common language, would be having to translate anyway. Because if party A speaks English only, party B speaks Romanian only, you have a bilingual Romanian-English mediator, the mediator is going to have to translate the Romanian dialogue with party B for party A, and the English dialogue with party A for party B. That would be completely where the mediator are, I'd have thought.
It might be difficult for them to conduct the mediation
As well.
to the best of their ability as a mediator. So probably to bring on independent professionals is the best way forward.
Okay.
Yes, I think so. Question, if you have a bilingual mediator, what is their core skill? Is their core skill interpretation and translation, or is their core skill mediation? And I think, thinking it through, my preference would be you have a mediator mediate, you have the interpreter interpret. But I don't know what the clients, the parties might feel there. But there's a great sense of common purpose where you have a professional in the room doing one specific task, the interpretation, and other professionals in the room doing another specific task, the mediation.
And looking at it a bit legalistically, might there not be professional indemnity issues if a mediator is trying to be an interpreter, albeit that they're accredited and insured as an interpreter, and that they're trying to be a mediator at the same time, albeit that they're accredited and insured to do that? If things went totally wrong, it could end up with sort of claims left, right and centre against that person, possibly in both of their capacities. And I don't think perhaps anybody would want to leave themselves open to that potential.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was going to make another observation on
Yeah.
that. I prepared a paper some years ago for the UK College of Family Mediators on conflict of interest. And one of the things that I identified as a potential risk was what I called role conflict. So if people are trying to use multiple roles with one couple or one set of parties in mediation, there is a risk that they don't apply the appropriate role boundaries if they're using more than one role. And the boundaries of one role may be inconsistent with the boundaries of the second role. So therefore, I think one role per person in the room strikes me as a good idea.
Would that mean then 2 interpreters?
No, one interpreter.
Only one interpreter?
Because the interpreter can be neutral.
Yeah.
But equally, if there's only one, if there's a language that the interpreter can interpret in both directions, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you had 2 languages that were not the language of the mediator,
Yeah.
you might very well want 2 interpreters.
Yeah.
So let us say you were having a mediation between an Italian and German couple. You might want an Italian interpreter and a German interpreter
Mm-hmm.
working with an English-speaking mediator, I would guess.
Okay. Because I would think that the party who has the native language of the interpreter maybe tends to be closer to the interpreter, and then the other party can then interpret that the interpreter is not neutral or is more helping one of the parties.
Well, there was the risk, of course, as we observed
Yeah.
today, that from time to time it could seem that Jim was being frozen out because of the commonality of language
Yeah.
between the interpreter and Julia. But that was something I think that as the day drew on, I, as a mediator, was certainly taking more control over who did what and when, so as to try and counteract that.
Right.
But I agree it is a risk.
And it's right to identify it in the room so that Jim isn't sitting there seething, thinking, well, hold on, nobody's recognising the fact that I'm only getting sort of a third of the talking time, as it were.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely right, isn't it, to name the elephant in the room and to reassure Jim that we are managing the situation and that he will be able to say everything he needs to say, but inevitably things do need to be repeated by the interpreter.
Some parties can feel aggrieved if they have what they perceive as being unequal airtime in the mediator.
Yeah.
But my hunch would be, but you were Jim, so tell me if I had this wrong. My hunch would be that towards the latter part of today's session, where I very much honed in on Julia and her concerns about Mirjana not getting talked to about death, that was trying very much to unpick, well, what are your true objections? What is your real issue with regard to Mirjana talking about death to a granddad? Because it's pretty normal.
Yeah.
So, therefore, whilst I wasn't engaging with you as I was asking those questions of Julia, my hunch would be that you as Jim were saying, yes, get to the bottom of this.
Exactly, that was exactly like that. I was happy that you were working with that.
But equally,
in that direction.
I suspect that you were also perhaps thinking, well, she's being put on the spot here, so if I manifest a reluctance to move from my position, if my position seems unrealistic, I'm going to get the same laser-like glare coming on me. So therefore, it's also very much a state of thinking, crikey, this is an effective process. And I want it to work to move Julia off her spot, but it means that if I get too fixated on my own spot, I'm going to be exposed in the same way.
Yeah.
But you know what, some clients don't actually think that through.
Okay.
And they're quite gleeful and gloating almost, and then the tables might turn quite naturally in the mediation and they find that they're the one on the spot, and you can almost see it going across their forehead. Oops, how did I get here? I thought these mediators were on my side, and we do remind them, we're impartial here. So that there are all sorts of changes in dynamics as the mediation proceeds, which are very interesting. And I must say, I think you're a very authentic Jim.
Yes, it's great.
Extremely good. Very. Are you an actor as well?
Yes.
Well, yes.
I started as an actor
Yes.
in audiobooks, and this
Yes.
so more like a voice then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm more into that. But
Oh,
Starting to get in
that
the
was
mood.
impressive. Because the trouble is, when you get mediators playing the parts of clients, we always vent all of our emotions by being the worst client we could ever imagine we could ever get, and we really ham it up and overact, which doesn't necessarily help our colleagues
No.
who are
Yeah.
mediators.
yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
warned of this when we do training courses. You know,
Yeah.
do not be the worst client you could ever imagine. But everybody still is.
Well, thank you. I was just trying to get
You're very welcome.
in the right mood.
Okay, so next question.
There are two sides to the project. One is investigating if legal interpreters or court interpreters can be turned into mediation interpreters by trying to see what differences are and trying to, as they are already accredited, can
Yes.
be better.
Yeah.
Can be better acknowledged by the mediation
Yeah.
community, or if there is a possibility for other kind of students who would like to choose mediation as maybe not such a difficult or daunting subject as legal interpreting. Is that real? I mean,
I think it's real. My concern is that there is probably much less mediation going on than people would imagine.
yeah,
So, if there are perhaps 30,000 mediations a year going on in England and Wales, what percentage of those mediation might have a language issue? Well, 1 in 20?
mm-hmm.
Fewer than that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking myself that question. And I'm thinking, well, how many mediations, say last year, did we start that had interpreters? And I would say certainly less than 5%.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in Birmingham, we work with a lot of Asian clients, but they're very often second and third generation Asians with Birmingham accents.
Yeah.
Language is not a problem. I think the time when we would need a mediator would be when somebody had come recently to this country. Sorry, an interpreter
Yeah.
would be when somebody has recently come to this country because they've married and they've come directly
For instance, yeah.
from Pakistan. In
Yeah.
particular. But
Was I working with you or with Susie on the one with the Portuguese-speaking couple from Africa?
I don't think it was me.
Okay, so we have a couple there. Sorry, both speak Spanish. One is the wife was from Spain, the husband was from Senegal, Angola. One
No,
of
I think it
those
was
guys.
me. Yeah, I
Yes.
think it was.
Yes.
Yes, I do remember them. Yes.
This is the one that they set up the thing in the Stately Home Garden.
I don't remember that. So I hope I'm thinking of the right one.
Okay.
Because I can't actually remember an interpreter. But I
We didn't have an interpreter.
Oh, well, that's why I can't
Yes.
remember the interpreter. I do remember them.
This is the one who was sort of seeing his new girlfriend in London.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the issue of the indefinite leave to remain that you didn't
Yeah.
have
Yes.
because he wasn't an EU national.
Yes.
Yes.
So that was a non-interpreter
But
one.
it was interesting because they would be mediating happily with them, and they would then switch into Spanish,
Uh-huh.
and neither of us could follow the Spanish.
Sure.
We might have a bit of a vague idea, but no more than that.
Yeah.
And of course, they were having angry asides in Spanish. We couldn't follow them there.
But they're obviously angry.
Yes,
Yeah.
they were very angry, but
Yeah.
we can't assist them if they're going to choose to depart from the language that we're using in the room.
Right.
And that, for me, was uncomfortable because I feel that we owe them almost a duty of care to look after them whilst they're under our roof and working with each other. And so if they choose to disappear into a different language and say horrible things to each other and wind each other up, well, it's very difficult for us to step in and say, stop, don't do it, if we don't know exactly what they're doing.
And it's almost helpful that well, we can kind of guess because you know, there are some words that we would pick up, but it's almost helpful that we're equally on the back foot with Spanish, isn't it? So that we're not actually picking up bits and thinking, oh, we can keep going with this. But on the other hand, I think we've worked with French Cameroon people. Robin speaks a lot more French than I do, but we've both got some. And we're able to understand when they then go into French. And that's a little bit confusing for everybody. Because they assume we don't.
It's also interesting, I've done a mediation between a couple where wife was a French speaker and husband was an English speaker. And she felt she needed a translator, which was fine. And I thought, well, what balderdash. I can do the French translation. And the mediation started, and I thought, crikey, no, I can't. It's beyond me. And so, again, that perhaps feeds into my response to your earlier question about, well, could you as a bilingual mediator translate? I think no.
Okay.
I really wouldn't do it. Unless, of course, both the couple had the common language. So if they were Urdu English, say, and you were Urdu English, well, that's fine.
And looking back at your question, in terms of the need for interpreters in mediation, the idea is, the government's idea, the Ministry of Justice, the idea is that there should be loads of mediation going on everywhere. And indeed, mediators believed that by now there would be, but there's been a bit of a cut-off in our supply chain of clients because with public funding ending with solicitors a year ago, that was one of our major sources of referral of work. The government hasn't executed a nationwide media campaign to educate people as to what mediation even is. A lot of people think it's about getting them back together again as a couple. So there's been this absolute falling off a cliff, frankly, of the numbers of people finding their way to mediation. If things do get themselves sorted out and things do work as the Ministry of Justice intend, I'm sure that there will be a lot more work for interpreters in mediation. But frankly, I haven't got a crystal ball, and many mediation outfits are closed because they just can't tread water for as long as it is evidently taking for the floodgates to be open again. So it's a very political situation at the moment. It's about, well, I suppose in theory it's about saving money, but it shouldn't be because money is being taken away from solicitors for most family work. And the idea was that money was put into mediation, a lot of money. Because people aren't finding us, they're ending up at court without legal advice, without representation. So you've got litigants in person, as they're called, on both sides, now in about half cases in the magistrates' court, having to deal with people with no idea at all of the legal process or of law. So, what a backward move for family justice. But that, sadly, is the situation we're in at the moment. And you've got mediators on the benches, as it were, not earning enough to make a living, and that all the bits are not joined up. So, when and if they do, I think it will be a lovely career for an interpreter. But I don't think anybody can guarantee things. Not even Robin, who's got his finger on the pulse. Robin goes and talks to judges, and it's all very, very difficult.